Good morning, everyone. Uh, Lee's back at you. I picked up the Wall Street Journal off the front porch this morning, put away my trash cans, and sat down and actually on the front porch. 78 degrees here in Arizona, gorgeous morning, and waved at the people walking up and down the street and read my paper from cover to cover, both sections. And so I've got a few things for you today. I think I've got 6 items, one or two are pretty minor. So, and obviously this podcasting has interrupted my hearing of the Judge Barrett hearing on the Senate floor this morning. Not very exciting so far. Not that I want it to be exciting, but pretty much speeches by everybody with no questions, and Judge Barrett's just sitting there listening to a bunch of speeches, and her family. So not very exciting for her. And every other person thinks she's a threat to mankind and democracy, and the other side thinks she's one of the best jurists that they could have picked. So somewhere in the middle is the truth, but I'm not sure we'll get to it. So first of all, just a couple comments about the Judge Barrett hearing. So what you're hearing is that there's certain legislation now at risk with putting her on the court. Okay, so typically it's the ACA, the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act. It can be abortion. And there's a few more, but primarily abortion and ACA is that. I'm not sure why, they haven't thrown women's rights to vote, segregation, or a number of issues that I guess Judge Barrett could decide on, and single-handedly, by the way, in the next few years, and change the course of democracy. So it's interesting to me. So those of you that studied the American sense of government and how it works, is what they're worried about right now is that the court will legislate on the Obamacare Act. So that's not what the court does. And I think, hopefully, all of us know that. So Congress already legislated, and they passed Obamacare, remember, with one vote, a Nebraska vote that was paid for with bribes, legal bribes, by the way. You can do this in politics. You trade votes, and so they passed it, with no Republican votes, and very late at night. After spending the first year of every political capital that Obama could muster, passed it. It was bad legislation, and many people at the time believed it was bad legislation and knew specifically where it was. It has held up very badly in the court system. There's been a few wins for the Obamacare people, but a lot of losses, significant losses. The mandatory part of it was a very significant loss. So what we've come to now is, because we can't legislate, and by the way, most of them are lawyers, and they will tell you that they're the best lawyers in the country, and that's why they're in the Senate right now. So they can't legislate, so they rely on the court as a backstop, and they rely on the court not to legislate, to fix the legislation. Remember, if you read many constitutional cases, what it includes from the jurist is advice back to the legislation to say, look, this is where you need to fix this case. Fix this. This is very badly worded or wrongly worded, or says the wrong thing, and therefore this is why it gets in trouble with the Constitution. So please go back and fix this. And so I think it's guidance that says, legislatures, do your job right in a nice way, and we won't be here deciding this case. So it's very easy to solve the Obamacare Act. Go legislate it correctly, do it correctly, and and fix bad legislation. So it's just interesting to hear the most competent senators in the world explaining how they absolutely need the court to uphold their bad legislation. I think it's interesting in ACA, anyways, Obamacare, that we can't figure out how to ensure only 20 million people are on Obamacare. 5% of America. I'm rounding off numbers probably there. Somebody will correct me. But around 5%. And it's totally dependent on the court. We're just sitting here just scared to death that we're going to change the makeup of the court. And there goes Obamacare. In my mind, they would have been much better creating some conditions to put them on Medicare and had an existing system that worked well and put 5% of America that are the most needy, that really need it, and put them on Medicare and be done with it. But there's probably a reason I'm not one of, especially since I don't have a law degree, right? I couldn't write legislation. So moving on, virus cases are up in Europe. France up 15% over the last week. UK's up over 20%. 8 U.S. states are up over 10%. So why is it? Well, I keep listening to the scientists, but they fooled me a few times. So I listen with careful ears now. But it appears like that younger people are a source of transmission. And it makes sense. They socialize more, and they need to socialize. They have a high need for it. They socialize more and therefore become spreaders of it. But what's interesting about this, and remember all that the scientists were telling this contact tracing would help us, and that people would get it. We would quickly do contact tracing because of rapid testing. We're testing so many people, and that we will be able to isolate those people very quickly, and therefore we would beat the virus. Hasn't worked that way, has it? Lots of people are quietly dismayed at the success of contact tracing. It's not working in Europe. It's not working here. It works well in very close societies with high computer tracking of individuals. South Korea, it worked fairly well in. May have worked well in China. I'm not sure we believe much of what comes out of there, but it may have worked well there. So it's really a less effective method than everybody had given it credit for. I like one person in the article was quoted as saying, "These measures we put in place were not cures; they were pause buttons." And I think that the lockdowns were a pause button. And remember, they were advertised as such. We forgot the advertisement. We remember flatten the curve. We've forgotten it completely, and we believed we had a cure, and they were not cures. They were pause buttons. Every once in a while, I'll read a letter to the editor that I like, and this week is I've seen a good one, and I call it Panic. I remember Bob Woodward really went after the Trump interview that he did, and he said Trump told him that he knew that the COVID was worse, but he didn't want to instill panic in the Americans. And so what Woodward failed to do is go back and say, what was Trump hearing from the experts at that time? I know what they were hearing from the experts at the time because I looked at the graphs and looked at them daily. Some of you remember how many deaths we were going to have? 2 million. 2 million deaths. What have we ended up so far? 200,000. A tenth of the deaths that the experts, all the scientific experts, right? There was great graphs out there, showed all the projections, looked wonderful. I knew better. I worked in an industry where we have had a lot of data, and you look at it with a jaundiced view, And I never believed that 2 million deaths. Not doesn't make me the smartest person in the world. There's a lot of people like me that never believed that. By the way, the one we elected to be president didn't believe it either, right? And he made it well known that this was crazy. This was never going to be that bad. But now we want to criticize him because he didn't want to panic the American people. Leaders take input and decide the best path. If we wanted a leader to take the scientific advice, we could do this with a computer. Put the advice in, spit out an answer. We wouldn't need any kind of a leader. And a politician wouldn't have to defend their leadership skills over the last few years or 50 years for us to believe in. We just say we have this algorithm. It's called AI, artificial intelligence. Works wonderful. You just put scientific evidence in, you have a decision that comes out. By the way, we know better in the COVID because we can look back in time now. The experts were wrong. They were wrong about masks. They were wrong about lockdowns. They were wrong about contact tracing. And by the way, they were wrong about who was at most at risk. They took way too long to figure out that the risk was with people over 60. And they were wrong about a lot of the treatments. They've come a long way on the treatments, haven't they? And by the way, death rate is not much of an issue anymore. So Rogers commented, facts don't matter. That's exactly right. Don't let facts get in the way of my ideology. Pelosi's insanity, my fourth article. So this has been an amazing story to me about this 25th Amendment committee that she's putting in place to handle the problem with a president that's insane or not able to handle the office anymore. So she was recommending, and by the way, Congress has a right to put a process in place. Listen to this process. It's a bipartisan 16-member committee. Well, it's not 16 members, it's 17. We'll get to that. So it's 8 Democrats. Think about this. The commission to figure out whether we've got a president that's sane or not is, in fact, a political one. It's 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans. So it's supposed to be 8 doctors and psychiatrists because we know that they'll be able to determine if the president is sane or not. And it's 8 former executive branch officers because we know that if they're close to the president and they're in their past, they would be able to judge whether a president is capable or not. And then, of course, that 16 people are going to pick a 17th member because we have a tie, 8 and 8, right? So we can't. Why do we have a tie? Because 8 Democrat, 8 Republican. Come on, stay with me here. It's not political, but it's political. So we're going to pick a 17th member that is going to be picked from all 16. Good luck if they can ever pick that 17th. I can't imagine the process to pick that 17th member. So, and by the way, then they're going to carry out a medical exam of the president. Can you just picture this process? A president is under pressure right now. I don't know what's going on. I mean, obviously we could use the Trump as an example. So he's been treated for a very treatable disease these days called COVID. And now we're going to bring this 17-member commission together after all the doctors have examined and said, here's what we're doing to work with him. And he's going to be in the hospital, great hospital. He's going to be there for a couple of days. Now we got this 17-member commission, and they're going to carry out a medical exam of the president. I can't imagine. I'd love to be a fly in the room when they're trying to do this. Especially with a president like Trump. So the article said, call this the Presidential Sanity Tribunal. I think the tribunal is a much better versus this committee, right? Tribunal, right? It all rests on their shoulders. And by the way, the current process requires the vice president's approval. You notice they've taken that out of this process because they know a vice president would never go along with this, right? unless, of course, the vice president clearly knew the president was not capable of making decisions. But for a president being in a hospital for 2 or 3 days, Trump is a mastermind at this. To me, I would have liked to argue this like I currently have argued it. What has Trump said? Oh, it's not for me. It's for Biden. Because we all know Biden's got mental issues. I think, whatever you think of Trump, he's a master persuader. And he has done another great job of deflecting and say, that's why Pelosi is insane right now. It seems like she's insane, but she has a good reason to do this. And pretty soon they have an issue that they're going to have to solve. Of course, if Biden wins the presidency, where current money is going right now. Fifth article, Kamala gets fracking education. So something that's not getting much news, of course, because it's not bad news, it's good news. The U.S. is doing really good in emissions. And emissions in the U.S. fell 2.8% last year. Why? Well, utilities replaced coal with natural gas. 60% of the gains in our emissions and dropping our emissions can be attributed to just one fact. Coal went away, natural gas came in. So the hydraulic fracking is caused tons of natural gas to be available. So much of it is available that the price is lowered. It went below the price of coal. And what do we have? Less coal mining. Now, that's what Obama tried to do with presidential decrees, and in some cases trying to help legislate, though that never happened. And and I'll sum up a little bit how Trump did that, but natural gas certainly attributed to that. CO2 from carbon emissions from coal has dropped 50% from 2007 to 2019. Half of the coal emissions are gone. And coal now produces less than 23% of electricity we have in this country. And that is dropping. If you look at the coal plants one by one, you can see, now many of them have a shutdown date of 10 years. It won't make 10 years, okay? They've got a projected date, but it won't make that long. They're dropping like flies. By the way, of all the large countries, the U.S. has the largest decline in CO2 emissions in 2019. So we're winning the environmental race, okay? We beat everybody else. I don't know how we did that, because we got out of the Paris Climate Accords. I'm not sure how we did that, because we're not a part of all those great scientists who are working together to drop emissions. So, and by the way, it really was due to a 15% reduction in the use of coal. So to sum it up, President Trump has taken us out of the Paris Climate Accord, okay? He's reduced the Obama regulation on fossil fuels. He's supported fracking. Remember, and turned on some pipelines. Remember one in North Dakota, famous one up there. And he's basically left coal alone. He left it to the market forces, didn't he? And said, if coal is not the right solution going forward, market forces will take care of it. Did. So with that kind of the government getting out of the environmental issues, we now lead the large countries in the world in CO2 reduction. So I like that. I like that process. It seems to have worked. Will it work long term? We'll see. But it certainly worked last year. And maybe we could go to the next climate meeting, and President Trump could address all the experts there on how to reduce CO2. And in China, that wouldn't go over well, because they're building coal plants, by the way, right? Because they've got excess coal, and Remember the Paris Climate Accord didn't hold them accountable until about 30 years out. It treated them like a developing country. And so it didn't hold them accountable, and they went ahead and built coal plants because who cares? So the last item is a quick one. A long time football riddle has been solved. And I love these kind of scientific people that look at certain things and can't explain certain things. So they work hard on trying to figure out why they don't make sense. So the spiral pass in football, Patrick Mahomes, others are really good at it. But people in the physics area look at this and say, I don't understand. The way that the physics works, the football should be a perfect spiral until it reaches the apex and starts coming down. When it starts coming down, physics says it should wobble like a wounded duck and be wobbling all the way down till the receiver either catches it or muffs the catch. And for years they've looked at that and said, this makes no sense whatsoever, because a good quarterback, it will continue to be not a perfect spiral. We always call it perfect spiral, and I'll get to that in a minute. But it turns out to be a very nice spiral right into the arms of the receiver. Why is that? And so they finally proved it over all these years that really it produces air coming by the football when it starts to come off the apex that actually produces a gyroscopic effect on the football and keeps that in that tight spiral. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a perfect spiral. Any close-up look at that football shows a wobble, perceptible wobble. It's not bad enough that it keeps receivers from catching it, but it is wobbling somewhat. It is not a perfect spiral. I remember in the early 70s working on a team that was designing a computer memory device. And I remember we had an old guy in there that was a genius. And I remember him arguing for the thinnest possible tires on race cars that we could put on them. And he said they would run faster. And he went up to the board. Back then it was a real chalkboard, and showed us all the physics. And when he showed us the physics, he was absolutely right. When somebody that didn't believe the physics put wide tires on Indianapolis cars, they proved the physicists wrong. So sometimes the scientists have trouble figuring out what the real reason going on in the background is. Their science just isn't enough. So keep that in mind when you listen to scientists. There's a move afoot in our society today to believe everything the scientists tell us. Let science determine. They'll tell us. And I'm old enough to know better. If they can't figure out why the football was wobbling, I'm going to look at a few other sources and let it go. So hope you enjoyed it today. Appreciate your comments, and have a great day. See you tomorrow. Cheers.